All right, good evening. I am here in the heart of America, broadcasting and heard on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, Studio B. Also simulcast at wolfspiritradio.com and heard at journeyswithrebecca.com. This is your host, Rebecca Jernigan, and you're listening to Journeys with Rebecca. Welcome to another Friday night, Friday the 13th, a full moon. And the next full moon on a Friday the 13th will not happen until the year 2047 or 2049. So this is a very, very significant night for everyone. And it's going to be no less significant or powerful. It's going to be a fantastic show. It's a great night. I have the wonderful Robert Morning Sky with me here tonight. Some of you may remember I had him on the show a few years back talking about the Lady of Fire. Well, in the years since then that Robert was on the show, he's written another book called The Lost History of Womankind, The Birth of God. And it's the first in a series, a trilogy that's coming out. And this for many of you will perhaps be the first time in hearing the story of history in quite this unique way. Now, the book and the story is truly interesting and amazing. It's going to leave you with many things to ponder. And when I am done with this portion of it, when we bring Robert onto the show tonight, I'm going to lead out with a couple of questions that's going to really give you a true synopsis as to how really unusual this story of history, of the lost history of womankind really is, how controversial it is, and how very powerful, and what a wonderful way that this man has expressing all of this information. So I'm delighted to have him on the show with me tonight. Now, this show was pre-recorded on the day before because Robert had another engagement. We kind of had this little mix-up with the scheduling conflict, and but this was actually recorded on the 12th. My engineer tonight, as well as friend and colleague, is JP, so he's handling the board tonight with us. So it's going to be a great show. So please remember that this is a pre-recorded show, just less than 24 hours old after you guys get this. So we won't be taking any calls tonight, and there won't be any questions in the chat box for the guests. But JP has some questions that he's going to be asking, as well as myself. So hopefully we will be able to intuit some of the questions that you may have had for Robert had this been a live show, and certainly we'll try to bring him on in the near future for another time to continue the discussion, perhaps even talk about his next book. So please remember that the radio stations that you're listening to are commercial free. They're listener supported, so please do use the site support button found at freedomslips.com and the donation button found at wolfspiritradio.com. And to get up all the latest updates in my newsletters, please log on to journeyswithrebecca.com and click on the newsletter feature, which is right there at the top right-hand corner of every page, and sign up for the free and confidential newsletter. I send them out when I have updates, news, or information. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Robert Morning Sky on with us. Hello, Robert. Good evening.
Good evening, Miss Rebecca. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, my goodness. My pleasure, my pleasure, my pleasure. As I was telling everyone, you had been on the show before talking about the Lady of Fire. What a fantastic introduction to you when we had you on talking to you about that. And you wrote me back a while ago about this book, The Lost History of Womankind. And your story in this is pretty fascinating. It's been kind of a trial and tribulation for you to get this book out. And so there's a couple of things that would like for you to kind of start with before we get into the context of the book, which is number one, is you were telling me the story off air here about sitting down with publishers and some of their information that they were sharing with you about getting this book published to begin with, those two specific publishers, and also kind of about your way of why you are presenting this history of the lost history of womankind, because I think that's going to put it kind of in a nutshell as far as why it can be such a controversial book. So if you will, please go ahead and kind of give everyone a quick synopsis of Robert Morningsky from around 1999 to present day?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Good questions. My career actually began when I was a child. I grew up on my granddad's, my Apache granddad. He had a ranch that essentially was a sanctuary for Native Americans from all over the Southwest and even from the East. And I grew up with the concept of star beings. In the Hopi world, they're called Kachinas. The Diné, or the Navajo, as you know them, were the Yebiche, the Apache Gons dancers. So I grew up with the concept of star beings and had absolutely no problem with the idea. It was when I got to university that, and I think like almost anybody else who goes there, that you suddenly are exposed to so many new ideas that you begin to question, was my background, was my religion, was my upbringing the right one? And for me, I have to tell you, my grandfather and those elders I grew up with, are pursue the truth, find out what it is. At that time, there was a much broader separation between Native America and what I would call the civilized world. And so I went after what is really going on there. And every time I looked at a new religion or discipline, whatever you want to call it, there was always one that was older. And eventually I got back into Sumeria, into Egypt. I had grown up with my grandfather who taught me to read the petroglyphs, the markings that are on the stones in various places in Arizona.
Oh, cool.
So when I got to looking at the Egyptian hieroglyphs, all due respect to Mr. Wallace Budge, I saw a different story. I read it differently, which then led me to ancient Sumeria and other languages. And ultimately, when I graduated, before I graduated, I wrote a thesis on what I call the hidden history of planet Earth. I had taken information from Sumeria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Babylon, the Ubaid, the Hindu, the Aryan, and put together a different story. There was something not like what we were being taught, even in university history classes, and especially not in public school classes. So I presented my thesis, Terra, the Hidden History of Planet Earth, and I was promptly, by my professor, told that this was an absurd story. It just couldn't happen. So when I left university, I actually graduated with a degree in mathematics and religion, which is a whole story in itself. They really are not different. But I started, rather than going into research and development and these other places, I chose to actually tour the United States. I would tell stories of my own people, of native tribes from around the United States. I put on dances. I would do honorings. I eventually was granted the opportunity to go to Switzerland, to Australia, to New Zealand, all around the United States, down into Mexico. I performed honorings. To the best of our knowledge, the elders in Egypt said we were the first ones to perform an honoring on the top of the Great Pyramid, performed an honoring at Teotihuacan. We did this in Cahokia, some pyramids most people don't know that are in the United States. I was in Australia, Mount Warning. I went to the Marae. I mean, it's an endless, it's an endless list, and I'm extremely fortunate to be able to pay my respects and honor the ancient ones from each one of these cultures. But at the same time, I was also able to speak to elders in those communities, and they would share stories, and it was remarkable, the parallels. They were so similar. I thought, well, this is fascinating. Well, in 1999, I was granted permission to dance on the top of the Great Pyramid. It took 2 years, and I actually resigned 3 times because the conference people who were going to sponsor it said, well, you have to go and you have to tell them how the Great Pyramid was made and all this. And I said, I refuse to go into another native people's country and tell them about their structures. I wouldn't want anyone to do that for me in the Apache world or the Hopi world. So I refused. I resigned. The elders wanted me back. I said, okay, we'll do this again. Then I had Native American groups here who said, well, you have to represent Native America when you go to the top of the pyramid. And I said, no, I resigned again. And finally, the elders allowed me to do that. And it was the most incredible thing, I think one of the most incredible things that have ever happened. But it opened the door to an invitation. There was a gentleman who approached me. I was in Switzerland and performing there, and a gentleman came up and asked if I would be interested in speaking to a group of elders who had gathered from around the globe. One thing led to another, and I have to tell you, I mean, they challenged me, they tested me, they wanted to know, could I deliver their stories with integrity and yet make it palatable or understandable to non-native people. They tested me physically, they tested my ability in so many different fronts. In 2003, I ultimately left the public speaking circuit, and along with my family and one woman who I will call my Lady of Fire, we were going to, because of the attention being put on the year 2012, we were going to present the history that these elders were sharing with us. Unfortunately, I lost my Lady of Fire to cancer, and pardon me, and I said, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just not going to do this. The reason I chose and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, is because the lost history of humankind, the lost history of planet Earth that I had been pursuing for so many years, ended up leading into the lost history of womankind. Now, with time permitting, I'll share with you evidence that our history, humankind's history, is actually based on the history of woman. And I felt that it would be improper for me as a man to present the lost history of womankind without a woman either taking the lead or at least standing by my side and saying, this is the way we do things. 2 years ago, finally, after a couple of years of just basically giving up, the elders and my family said, look, out of respect for the elders, out of respect for your Lady of Fire, out of respect for the women and the daughters that, are here and will be here in the future, you at least need to share the story. And if it's proper, and if there is a woman or a group of women who want to pursue this on a global stage, then at least you can be there to help them with the information. So I did a couple of radio interviews. Rebecca, you would be surprised at would it surprise you, male radio talk show host who absolutely did not like what I was saying. I actually applied to a couple of the conferences that I used to attend and was rejected or just simply ignored.
Oh, wow.
I went to a couple of publishers and said, I would like to present this story. The first publisher, he was just, and I'm going to take it as a compliment because he said, no, there's too much information in here. You've got too much. It's not reader-friendly. It's not going to be something people are going to want to read. And effectively, he shut me down. A second publisher said, no, what you're doing is you're trying to sell a female religion, and it's anti-Christian, it's anti-God, it's anti... And he tried to portray it as my attempt to sell what ultimately, and I'm using the exact words, I was trying to sell a satanic religion. He was so wrong on both fronts that I said, okay, well, we're going to go ahead. We're going to publish this book. I am extremely fortunate that we have had people from all over the globe. And in some cases, as I told you, we've had women from Iraq, from Iran, Saudi Arabia, from India, from places you would think, no way that they're going to want to read about this. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's exactly the place where they would want to read about this. And I've had responses from all over the globe, from women and, surprisingly, from men, because it makes sense. I think if you look at what's going on, I mean, even just in the last couple of weeks, possibly month, how many shootings have there been in our country alone? I mean, schools and malls, a policeman in a pizza parlor. I mean, it's remarkable. And I think people are beginning to realize that, look, if the major religions really worked, why are these things continuing to happen? Why are people dissatisfied with their lives? Effectively, almost everything around us is some form of escape. Movies are escape. Video games are escape. DVD movies are escape. It's escape from the reality that we have on a day-by-day basis. And I don't believe, I am persuaded, that religions that are based on the words of people who lived thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, how can they possibly apply to our lives today? The religions in general are thou shalt not and thou shalt, with little ability to apply them on our day-to-day basis for our own existence. But what I discovered in working with the elders is there is a lost history of womankind, and there are some old ways, but it is not a religion. It is a way of life that encourages free will. It encourages independence. It encourages relationships and even talks and shares, how a relationship should be viewed. It is not a woman's oriented way of life, though in a strange way it is, and I'll explain that in a moment. I'm not talking about a matriarchy that we want to reinstill. That's not the case. The lost history of womankind, in a very, very simple way, what it says is that we human beings who have been contacted by something out there, or someone, whatever your words you choose to use, we have an opportunity to reach out beyond our existence on this planet, beyond our mortal existence, and take our place in the stars. But we have to earn it. We can earn it by pursuing the fire and the spirit that is inside. When you lay these rules that thou shalt not effectively use your heart, use your body, use your mind, those religions, those disciplines are denying you the very gifts you were given by effectively the divine ones. Why would a divinity give you a mind that is a remarkable, remarkable organ, and then turn around and say, no, you can't think, you can't question, you can't ask? Why would a divinity give you this remarkable body that we have, and then turn around and say, no, you must deny this part, this pleasure, this feeling, this emotion? Why all these gifts from a divine one who would then turn around and say, you can't use this, you can't do that, you can't think, you can't use your heart, you can only do what I tell you? It is remarkable. And in the lost history of womankind, there is a discipline. It's called Udugan. Udugan. And it basically says you pursue your fire. We live in a world, a material world, a real world. It's what I call the 4% world. Scientists, astronomers, physicists have looked out into the universe, and they've made a remarkable discovery. 96% of our universe, or at least what they perceive to be our universe, is unknown. They say it's dark matter, dark energy, but they have no idea what it is. It is unknown. 4% of our universe is comprised of stuff. Half of that 4% is all hydrogen and helium. 2% of the universe, 2%, is all of the planets, the meteorites, the suns, all of the stuff, the physical things in the entire universe compromises 2% of existence. And we live in that existence. What the lost history says, what Udugan ways are, which effectively are the same as what some tribes call shamanism, is that if we are going to reach beyond this reality, this physical world, if we are going to go actually out into the solar system and the heavens, we're not going to do it by focusing on our bodies, on our 2%, and on technology. We are going to do it by working on what is inside us, our spirit and our fire. Allow me a moment here for an example. I recently I don't know how to word this. There are some people who say that the Great Pyramid is this remarkable machine and has these energies. It's a power source. It does all these things. There are people that say that the same thing about Stonehenge and Easter Island and all these mysterious structures, that they're all power sources. They have all these hidden energies and everything. And the problem is there is no evidence for that. They say these things, but there is no evidence. They apply math, they put in numbers, and they do all that. But you know what? That's exactly what the Egyptians did when they were trying to figure out the mysteries of the world. They took their most sophisticated technology, which were boats, and said, okay, to reach into go in boats. For the pharaohs to reach into the other world, he's going to have to go in a boat. The Greeks, the Hittites, the Sumerians, their most sophisticated technology was chariots. So therefore, if we're going to reach into the stars, we're going to have to go in chariots. If we're going to reach into the spirit world, we have to use chariots. The gods use chariots. The gods use boats. And that is exactly what is happening today. There are, with all due respect again, there are speakers that are out there that are saying the Great Pyramid has to be using the most sophisticated technology we have today. And the Stonehenge has to be using the sophisticated technology we have today. But here's the difference, the Udugan versus what I would call the civilized way. What is the power source for the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, Easter Island, and all these structures? Is very simple. It's a human being, a person, man or woman, who has the fire and the spirit to use what is inside them to make things happen. Now, I explained a moment ago, 96% of the universe is unknown. Scientists cannot explain what it is, period. However, that 96% exists in our solar system, on our planet, in our bodies. Shamanism, any form of discipline that talks about spirit, what it is addressing is that 96% unknown fire, spirit, force, whatever you want to call it, that's inside us. There have been countless studies in Siberia, in Africa, South America, and even in Native America, where experts have gone out there and they have looked at shamans, shamanesses, and the things they can do that are effectively impossible. And I will tell you that it is not impossible. It's something I grew up with in a lot of, especially natives from the old world. You touch the 96%. And that's what allows you to do what is impossible. Recently, a lady from Canada sent me an article, and she said that there are several studies, but one in particular, that said that scientists have wired the human brain, and they have found that a split second, from a half a second or less, prior to a decision being made. For example, I'm going to reach over and grab my cup. They found that at least half a second, in some cases even more, a half a second before the brain made the electrical decision, the body was already moving. Why? And they're saying, well, this proves there is no free will. Something is directing you. You know, somebody has control of your brain. And I'm going to argue it's your 96% that allows you to make unconscious decisions. It's your 96% that causes you to have that feeling of love. It's that 96% that allows a grandma to go out and lift the car off of her grandson because the jack broke and it fell on top of him. It's that 96%, excuse my example, it's that 96% that allows women to know things they shouldn't know. Women have an extraordinary amount of 96% ability that we males do not. And I can give you the scientific evidence for that in a moment.
Okay.
But women have an extraordinary ability to feel things, know things, see things that men cannot. Why? Okay? Let me give you a second. The physical evidence, okay, and this is in my book, the first book. We are, in most religions, created in the image of God, the Divine One. Okay? And I said, okay, if that's true, did you know, okay, we'll begin, let's say, with the human embryo. The female egg is actually 14,500 times larger than the human sperm. Okay? The egg is 14,500 times larger than the sperm. They unite, they create the basic embryo. It is 14,500 parts female, 1 part male. Now, if we're created in the image of God, okay, your call. 14,500 times larger. Okay, the X chromosome, indicative of the female. The Y chromosome, indicative of the male. The average female X chromosome has approximately 3,700 genes on it, okay?
Right.
3,700 genes on the female chromosome. The Y male chromosome has approximately 15 male genes. So when the embryo is formed, it has 3,700 female genes, X genes, 15 male genes, created in the image of God. All right. Doctors, biologists, people have been studying the X and the Y chromosome.
Right.
And a lot of them are saying that the Y chromosome is essentially an X chromosome minus 1 arm. The X chromosome is vital to life. You cannot have life if it does not have an X chromosome. A Y chromosome is really not necessary to life. When the human embryo is first born, so to speak, when it is first created, conceived, every single embryo on the human planet, every single one, is oriented towards becoming female. It is not my opinion. It is a medical and scientific fact.
Correct.
Ultimately, a few weeks after conception, the embryo is bathed with testosterone. It is the testosterone that then alters the female embryo into a male embryo. I have caught holy heck because I have said that ultimately our humankind is made up of females and altered females. Males are altered females. I'm sure you understand how popular that made me.
Oh, I can hear some of the audience out there now, Robert. I can see the writing on the wall.
I will leave it up to you. When you put the pieces together, humankind is created in the image of God. And the number of genes, the number of chromosomes, and the genetic structure, if it is all thousands and thousands of times larger than the male gene, sperm, etc., whose image are we created in? Mm-hmm. The Y chromosome, you know what? You could go on the internet and you can look this up. And you look up when the Y chromosome first appeared. The best estimates is that life appeared about 4.5 billion years ago, about 4.5 billion years ago. The Y chromosome, again, go on Wikipedia, look it up on the internet, and you're going to find that the Y chromosome appeared approximately at the longest time 320 million years ago. In other words, for the first 4.2 billion years of life on Earth, no Y chromosome existed. This is not my opinion. Scientific fact said the X chromosome existed for almost 4.2 billion years before the Y chromosome appeared. Why? How come? I'm going to argue that be it God, gods, extraterrestrials, spirit beings, whatever, whoever created or at least inspired humankind was predominantly female. This is, again, not my opinion, it is scientific fact. Females are the driving force in the universe. Males are altered females, not my opinion, scientific fact. Look, dogs are supposed to come from wolves. And from wolves, we end up over time, you've got Chihuahuas, you've got Bulldogs, you've got German Shepherds, and Great Danes. They're all dogs, but they are altered wolves. I'm saying the same thing. Males are altered females. Now, rather than cause a problem, men and women should go, oh my gosh, we're actually the same thing. There is only a slight difference in the structure. That's it. We are humankind, and we are based on, derived from, a driving force in the universe, a creative force that is feminine directed. I apologize, I've gone on and on here.
Oh,
but
no.
Ultimately, when I took the stories of the elders, and I refer to the elders that approached me in Switzerland as Semsia, which is an old Siberian word which means hidden or concealed, because they have remained out of the public eye for generations and passing the stories on. And when I was approached by the Semsia elders, and they shared these stories with me, and then I compared it with scientific studies and historical studies and linguistic studies, it was undeniable. I was stunned. It is not where I intended to go, but that's where I ended up. Humankind is made of females and altered females. That is not a bad thing. That is an extraordinary, amazing thing that says we are one. There is no war of the sexes. There is a war, excuse the phraseology, there is a war of sisters. We men have the same abilities that women have, but we have to work harder at it. We have more strength generally. We have more courage generally. But you know what? We can learn. We can learn from women. The story of the lost history of womankind basically says that many thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, when scientists say that there is, a glacial age that covered all of northern part of our world, I've had scientists who say there could not have been, and the story of the Udugan takes place in Siberia. They have said that Siberia, that entire northern part of Russia, had to have been covered by glaciers, and therefore there could not have been a society that existed there in a place called Lake Baikal, northern part of Russia.
Right.
Well, it turns out that paleoclimatologists, people who study ancient weathers, well, guess what they found? The area in Siberia surrounding Lake Baikal was actually spared the glaciers for some unknown reason. It was a place with grasses, it was fertile, there was plant life. It was not frozen over tens of thousands of years ago. In this area, in northern Russia, near a place called Lake Baikal, the stories of the Semsia, the oldest stories, say that a star being descended from the heavens. Now, those are my words, because I think they're the most easily understood. A star being, an extraterrestrial, a goddess, whatever you want to call her, a female star being descended to the earth and took up residence within the lake, within Lake Baikal. And there within the lake, she reached out and she created the first human being back up. There were already in existence what I would call proto-human beings, prehistoric primitive man. And I say that because through the efforts of this divine star woman, she formed and put together the first human being that had physical form and a soul. In other words, prior to this time, humankind was soulless. It didn't have what we would call the soul. This divine woman introduced, put together physical and spirit into one. She raised these beings, males and females, and taught them the Udugan ways, the ways of the stars. And this is using the spirit within you, using the fire that allows you, for example, to climb up the side of a mountain in minutes where normally it would take hours. This is the ability to sense someone who is a danger. This is the ability to sniff the wind and know that there are animals for food that are miles away. This is the most basic form of shamanism. And she raised these groups of people. The women were the most accomplished because they were women. There were, however, males who were also accomplished. And the divine woman, the name given to her was Eke, E-K-E, Eke. And the divine woman wanted to know if there were human beings outside of the garden she had created, this sanctuary, who might have the ability and the desire to learn the star ways. One remarkable young man, a man who used his physical skills, his strength, his courage, and the fire that he learned from the lady, became what is known as a master teacher. And he was given the name Abala. Abala, the great teacher, the master teacher, was sent out into the outside world by the divine woman to see if he could find people who wanted to know how to reach beyond this life, people who knew there was more to life than just the drudgery of, escaping from the predators and trying to eke out a living. Mm-hmm. Eventually, he would go out. He found people, he taught them, but he would return back to his northern hidden kingdom. And he traveled and traveled and traveled. Eventually, between Lady Eke and Abala, they trained more teachers, and more of these teachers went out. They, too, earned the honorary title of Abala. Abala would eventually end up in what was Proto-Greece, and he was the inspiration for a legendary god known as Apollo. Apollo, who would teach this intruder. If you know the history of Apollo, he was an intruder. Mm-hmm. He showed up from out of nowhere. And he eventually, after spending time, he would go back to this northern hidden kingdom called Hyperborea. He was responsible for Delphi. And these teachers, Abala, the master teacher, and those students that he eventually taught to do the same as he did, eventually they became known. The teachings of the divine woman, the teachings of the star wave were uncovered by these tribal chieftains. In the book, I trace the history of one particular war chieftain. His name is Lord Da'ila, mm-hmm. who wanted to acquire the powers for himself. He wanted to capture the Udugan women. He wanted that power they had to reach beyond the norm, to reach into the great beyond. And it is through his efforts that male god religions were born and began to suppress, transform, change, alter, and edit the original teachings into such a form called a Toru that would allow him to declare himself the son of the divine and to tell people what to do. My apologies for ranting on for so long.
Oh, no, you're fine.
And in the book, the first book, we show how Lord Da'ila, having acquired bits and pieces, how he transformed the female Udugan ways into his own in his own religion, so that he was the son of the divine. On our website, if you take a look, I'm sorry, I need to explain something here. Historians, particularly linguists, linguistic experts, they have taken the ancient languages and they have analyzed them and say this word means this and this word means that, and they've assigned values, and from there they construct these ancient languages, in particular one called the Indo-European, the Indo-European, which is it's a hypothetical reconstruction of what may have been the oldest language in the world. I am arguing that their hypothetical oldest language is actually based on the language used by the Udugan, the master teacher of Bala, and the influence they had. It is not the oldest language, but it was the most influential. But now here's the trick, here's the catch. I cannot tell you how many years I've studied languages. And one of the things I found is that linguistic experts will take a word and they assign a very hard value. But they have missed the concept of a euphemism. A euphemism is a word that is used in place of a perhaps more harsh or a meaning that you kind of want to hide. Okay? For example, pardon me because I want to be delicate here, but in today's world, if a man calls or a woman calls another man a dick, that is a euphemism. They don't mean that his name is Richard. They don't mean that he comes from a family of Richards. They're saying something else.
Yep.
Linguistic experts have taken the same concept and they apply it to thousands of years ago in the language. There was a man who was a dick. And they say, okay, he must have been named Richard, and he did all these terrible things, and that's why Richard is such a terrible, terrible name. Okay? Mm. And what I found was perhaps the most basic word, the one that I begin with and introduce in our book. There are countless words that are used in ancient languages, and they have been defined as to cut, as in use a knife and you cut something right. Is cut, it's bleeding, okay. And they have taken words that they interpret as cut, and they say, well, it had to mean a slice, a cut, a wound, an injury, something that bleeds. But they missed the euphemisms used by men thousands and thousands of years ago. The cut is a euphemism for a woman's private organs. Now, think about it for a moment. Primitive man, prehistoric man, they see a woman's cut. It bleeds. It is this remarkable thing, this cut. That is where a child comes from. It stops bleeding for some unknown reason. And the languages that use the word cut over and over and over again, our modern-day linguistic experts are ignoring the fact that it is a euphemism. One other, and I will direct your attention to my website, my Morning Sky website, is this one is perhaps one of the most influential, and you'll see it everywhere. It's the I. Mm. Okay? Use your imagination. The woman's sexual organs, a euphemism for it is an eye. And if one opens the eye, you will see the pupil. What influence does the eye have on the history of humankind? What is the eye of God? Why don't the religions talk about the eyes, plural, of God? Or does God just have one eye? There's a reason. Because originally, Lord Daila, men of power, men who wanted to control women, what they did was they said the eye of God was the eye of the goddess. And it became an evil thing. Then men said, no, wait a minute, let us use the eye of God as a symbol for who? The Masons, the eye of Horus, and on every single dollar bill, look in your wallet, you will see on the top of the pyramid, there's a triangle, and there is the divine eye of God. Why isn't it the eyes, plural, of God? It's one, because it goes back to a euphemism for a woman's cut. I have on my website countless symbols that use the eye and the evil eye that has this extraordinary power over men. There have been claims, it's phenomenal, there have been claims that the evil eye will render a man impotent. The evil eye will capture him and there's nothing that he can do about it. So they have amulets to ward off the evil eye. In ancient Greece and even in Rome, the amulet that gave you protection against the evil eye, I kid you not, was the symbol, it was a little charm of a phallus. Why would a phallus be a protection against the evil eye? Because the eye was a euphemism for a woman's private parts. Please, look on my website and you'll see what I'm talking about. The evil eye of God. The evil eye and the eye of God. I could go on and on for hours, but I have been rambling. I'm sorry.
Oh gosh, no. I will interject a little bit here. As I was reading that portion in the book about the eye, and I'm just going to give you my first introduction. I don't know, 40 years ago, whatever it was. I was young, to the eye of Horus, the eye of the all-seeing. The eye, right? Again, there's 1,000 different presentations of the eye, whether it be for good purposes or negative purposes, the evil eye or the eye of God or the all-seeing eye, whatever it is. And I always thought, well, isn't that it's so here from somebody that's really, really young, right? I know nothing about anything at this point, and I'm thinking, well, I wonder if that was a Cyclops. Because I'm thinking, you see, but taking that to a step further, why wasn't there two eyes? I didn't think of it like that. I didn't think, well, why isn't there two eyes? I was like, I wonder if they're talking about a Cyclops, because they only have one eye, right? I'm thinking, well, that's just very odd. I think the whole thing was odd. It just didn't set right with me, right? So just to let you know, so obviously, go ahead.
And there is actually an effort to turn that eye into an eye. There was an effort, but it failed miserably. But let me see if I can take your listeners into a point of imagination.
Okay, so before you do that, we are down to about 5 or 6 minutes. So,
okay,
yeah,
I can do this quickly.
Great.
All right. Try to imagine in your eyes taking a look at the lower part of a woman's body, and you will see a triangle, the pubic hair. It's a triangle. If you look at the eye within the triangle, it is up and down. It is vertical, okay? So that if you open the eye, you have the eye sideways in the triangle. What these men of power did, my verbiage, my terminology, is they took the triangle and they turned it upside down. Now the eye is still up and down. So then they turn the eye sideways. So what you have is an inverted triangle, an inverted pubic triangle with the eye turned, instead of up and down, sideways. That is the eye of God, and why you have a triangle and only one eye. It's that simple. The eye of God then goes on. It becomes a symbol used by the Masons. It's used, like I said, it's on our dollar bills. The compass and triangle of the Freemasons. take a look on my website, and I will show you how the eye in the pubic triangle becomes a diamond, which then, by extending the sides, becomes the compass and the triangle, on and on. So, the mystic eye is actually a symbol of a woman's organs, and it continues. The cut. Another word for cut was, in the ancient language, esk, E-S-K-E. It became S-E-K, which in time became sex. The word sex is derived from a primitive word that meant cut. Now, how could that be? How did the linguistic experts miss that? Because they're males want to go there.
Well, and that's true. You know, there's a lot to be said about that, Robert, where anybody that goes into, you know, research has to keep an open mind and not bring their own, I guess you call it limitations or their viewpoints or their belief systems, and let the information speak for itself. You know, even if you find something as a researcher, as a scientist, and you don't like what it is that you find, doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Seriously. I mean, it really is that simple, but it's not that easy, and I understand that. So before we go on break, we got about 3 minutes here. We're going to go on break, Robert. So what is your website address? You know, I did not get that from you. I forgot all about it. So if you'll give us that website address so that when we're at break, people can go to your website and, you know, check out all the information there.
Okay, it's very simple. It's www.robertmorningsky.com.
That's really hard.
Yes, robertmorningsky.com, yes.
Okay.
I do have a second site. It's ladyoffire.com. Okay. And there's an extension on both of those. Some information is shared, but there is some differentiation. I try to keep some of the Lady of Fire information on that one site. So it's robertmorningsky.com and ladyoffire.com.
And for those of you who are listening to this show tonight or listening as an audio archive here of this show, I would suggest checking out the ladyoffire.com website. That was the first show that Robert did, and this is what the material was that he presented was from the Lady of Fire. And Robert contacted me, like I said at the beginning of the show tonight, to see if I would be interested in having him back on in regards to this book, The Lost History of Womankind. And when I agreed, you know, I readily agreed. It wasn't reluctantly. I readily agreed to have him back on my show again. Your response, Robert, was quite interesting, and I want to share this with people before we have to go on break here. And you said, well, you are a brave woman. Most everyone that you have approached did not accept having you on their programs because of the information that's packed into this book. And I want to say, as I thought, well, now what an odd thing to say. Why would I be brave? And I read the book and I was like, okay, now I understand where the controversy is in this book. And we're going to talk a little bit about that at the very beginning when we come back off a break. But right now, everyone, we're going to take a short break. Please come back and visit us in the second hour. My guest tonight is Robert Morningsky, The Lost History of Womankind. Stay with us. All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a nice little break. My guest tonight is Robert Morningsky, The Lost History of Womankind, The Birth of God. The first hour was just filled with tons of information, Robert, just a wealth of information. And I thank you again for being here, for, you know, sharing this story. And one of the things that I put in the newsletter was that this show was not just for women, but it was also for men. You know, if we truly care about the truth, there's many people out there, Robert, that say they care about the truth. They want to know the truth. And then when something comes along, that there's some evidence, there's some information, there's another way of looking at stuff, those that say they want the truth are the first ones to balk at it because it shakes the status quo, that which has been so ingrained upon this planet. Now, my guides call it the construct, which is that programming, so to speak. You hear a story often enough, long enough, and even though you know the truth, you begin to believe it yourself because everybody else does. Very hard to stand in your own truth when everybody else has decided that that's not the truth. So it really does take an extraordinary individual to not allow the programming to consume what they know from somewhere that may not even be logical or reasonable to them, that what is being said or how they're living or what they're doing or what's being presented isn't the truth. It takes a really, really strong individual. That doesn't mean that they have to fight with anybody about it. It doesn't even mean that they have to bring up if they don't agree with it. It's really more about how are they feeling about this new information, and can they be a way shower? And the story in The Lost History of Womankind, when you were talking about the place in Siberia there, and how the women were teaching the different ways of being. Again, it wasn't a religion. It wasn't about being a follower, or certainly, as you stated, the men became master teachers and went out into the world. And the information basically was contorted, and it was twisted and contaminated. And before we get really into more of the book, I want to make a couple of observations that I made. I went to Egypt back in 2012, and I went to a lot of the temples there, right? And in the temples, of course, you know, Robert, they have all the hieroglyphics in there, all over everywhere. And you're looking at this, and you're looking at this, and you're looking at this, and of course, the information is that it's been, translated, and this is what this means, and this is what that means. And I kept looking at that, Robert, and kept looking at that, and I was like, that's not what it means at all. I don't know what it means, but it isn't that. I mean, I know that. I mean, I absolutely know that. And so how many hundreds and thousands of years have they said, well, this is what that means? It just didn't feel right. It was like, this story that they're telling about this, and this is not true. The second thing about that trip to Egypt was when I was in the Cairo Museum. And in one of the beginning rooms, the way the Cairo Museum was laid out, it's since been, my understanding, it's since been after our group was there, it's been looted, and much of the artifacts were taken or destroyed. But in one of the earlier rooms, it was structured so that the oldest artifacts were first, and then it kind of moved around, and as it moved around, it became those that were became later in their discoveries and presentation. So in this room, there was these huge statues. I mean, just, larger than life, giants, and they're all standing there. I'm looking at these statues, and of course the guide's talking about something, and I'm not really paying attention to what's actually being said, but only that I kept looking at it, and I was like, I had the men in the group come over and look at it, and I said, well, what? I said, look at these men. I said, look, besides the fact that they were supposed to be perfect, they were perfect human beings. They were perfect in their structure. Their symmetry was, perfectly shaped shoulders, perfect arms, legs, the eyes, perfect spacing, the nostrils, the nose. Everything was perfect about them. And then as you begin to look at more of the details, I looked at it and I was like, so I want you to look at the waistline of these beings. Look at this waistline. I said, does your waistline look like that? I said, do you have that kind of a waistline? They were like, no. And I said, okay, so this plate that they wear that goes around their neck, and it rests on them, and it covers the upper torso. It covers just below where the breast would be, or the pectorals on a man. So you really don't know if that's male or female. You can't tell. And of course, they're wearing bottoms, so you can't tell. There are no shoes. There are no distinguishing mode of dress that would distinguish them from male or female. But I looked at this and I was like, so are they androgynous? Or were they all female posing as men? Is there a big lie here, or is there something here that we're not getting? And not that I expect you to have an answer to this, Robert. it was like I stood in that room and I was like, there's something so wrong about what is being presented and who these beings were, and were they really male? Or were they something else? Because they were too perfect and almost too feminine in their structure. Now, these are the very early points. This is the stuff that they don't talk about so much in Egypt history, and when you're with these tour guides and et cetera and so forth, because it's the oldest one. This is where the star beings are presented, and they kind of just blow by it. You know, they don't really want you to stop and ask questions because they themselves have not learned about it, because that's, you know, the history of Egypt is not what they are telling you it is, and they don't want you to know, or they don't want you to question. They spoon feed you what it is that they want you to know as a quote unquote tourist there. So I found that rather interesting, and those were just kind of the things, and so it's allowed me to be way more open-minded about what it is that may present itself, because it just has to be that you have to look at this and go, you know what, it doesn't feel right. I don't know that I have the right answer here, but there's something here that's amiss. So I'm reading this book, The Lost History of Womankind, and I'm thinking to myself, here's this tale on Siberia, and you get into the linguistics in here very well. You go in there and you talk about the metaphors and the euphemisms and where the language actually come from. It's really a very well thought out book. So the publisher that said you were giving too much information, I don't agree. I disagree. I think that this book sets it up for a complete picture of how the story began, which is the history of humanity on this planet. So that being said, all of those things, perhaps what we could do is go forward a little bit, have you share some additional information. I know that my lovely colleague and tonight's engineer, JP, does have some questions for you, and hopefully they relate to this topic, and we'll kind of do from there. How does that sound?
That's fine. Yes.
Okay, so now who's the one that's blabbering?
No, thank you. Actually, you know, you've touched on something. I did spend time in Egypt, like I said, on the pyramid and looked around. Zahi Hawass, the gentleman who allowed it to happen, the elders that were there, Aguda Fayed, member of the Fayed family, Dodi Fayed, who was going to marry
yes.
Diana. And here's what was interesting is, as you're touching on something that is really is fascinating. There's a two-part answer to these figures. Are they female, or do they have female characteristics and traits? And I would say a little bit of both. One of the things that history seems to show, seems as I think being
the operative word,
cautious, yes, is too cautious, is one of the things that has happened, and I think even in today's world, men throughout time, and again, even in today, men today are afraid of women. They're in awe of women. They want to conquer women. They want to have women present. There is an underlying, I will argue, subconscious knowing that woman is a remarkable creature. And the concept of beauty, if you look at all of the artifacts, if you look at the artwork, if you look at the carvings, if you look at the inscriptions and glyphs all over the globe, ultimately, the word beauty, is that often, more often used, what is the greatest representative of beauty, male or female? The female. And throughout time, and in Egypt, you picked a really good example, men have wanted to portray themselves as godly and divine, meaning they are perfect, but that means also that they must be beautiful.
Right.
And if you will look at these statues, if you look at the inscriptions and the scrolls, the papyrus scrolls, they have eye makeup. They, in fact, most people don't know that the priests and the pharaohs, they would use seashells to pluck the unnecessary hair, should I say,
right,
from all over their bodies. They would pluck the hair. They would decorate themselves and dress themselves, trying to convey the image of beauty, which is feminine. And a lot of the statues and figures that are out there are imposing a feminine beauty on a male figure. Now, having said that, am I saying that the divine ones, not necessarily the pharaohs, though there were some pharaohs who were females, the divine beings, am I saying that they were male and female? No. I will argue, and again, stir up the pot, I will argue that the gods of humankind throughout history, even though they're presented as male, they were females. Let me, if I can, if anyone is familiar with the Terra papers that I wrote years and years and years ago, I caution you again, if you look on the internet, that's not my work. They're edited, they're altered, they're changed. That is not my work. TerraPapers.com is not my work. People have stolen, used, altered, changed. If it's not on my website, it's not mine. But there is a very pivotal figure that in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, Babylon, in the Middle East, there's a pivotal god, a figure named Enki. Enki is supposedly the one who was the god of creation, the god of artists, the god of dance, the god who taught humankind wisdom, intelligence, knowledge, etc. Pivotal figure. His name was Enki. And he's often depicted with, from his shoulders, there's these long, flowing lines of water that come flowing out. Okay. A moment ago, or earlier, I said that the divine being was named Eke, E-K-E. This was the name given to the divine star woman who descended, also known as the goddess in legends. And in the ancient Siberian, the Proto-Mongolian language, the word E-N-E-N meant lady, but in the sense of a priestess or a divine one. Okay?
Right.
And the divine star woman, the divine being from the heavens who came down, and in the book I trace how she trained, she taught and showed human beings the ways of the stars, how to become shaman, shamaness, how to use the spirit and the fire within. That divine being, she was known as Lady Eke. Lady, however, meaning divine or in the sense of holy, sacred priestess, that kind of thing. Her name, her title was Enki. Abbreviated, it becomes Enki. I am going to argue that when I wrote the Terra Papers so many, many years ago and talked about the god Enki, I made a mistake. Enki was a female. And the primary and oldest gods in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, and Babylon, they were all female divinities. And you want to stir the pot? Look in my book, the first one, and it's The Birth of God. And in the book, I am arguing that men of power, men who literally, tribal chieftains, rich men, wealthy men, they transformed the divine feminine, Lady Eke, into a male god. In the Proto-Mongolian language, the word Abba, A-B-A, means magic, but in the sense of spiritual magic, divine magic, holy magic, those kind of powers, that magic that divine beings have. And the magic and the power, the spirit of the divine woman was Eki Abba. And abbreviated form, it evolved into Ekaba. The word for God, Proto-Mongolian, Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, is Yah. Yah Eki Abba, the goddess Eki spirit, the goddess Eki of magic, divine spirit, divine power. Yah Eki Abba. In the book I show you, Yah Eki Abba eventually became Yahovah. A secret identity of God, a female divine being. In the book, I trace the secret identity of Adam. In our second book, the secret identity of Moses, of Eve, and all of these figures. And I promise you, you're going to be surprised. These are, again, not my opinions. These are linguistic constructions that are based upon the findings of modern-day scholars from hundreds of years ago, and even the scholars in the Bible age and the Middle Ages. It's their words that when you look at them, you put them together, and guess what? They're based on a feminine divine. They're based on women and the awe that men have about women. So I kind of got off topic, but the concept of beauty is feminine. Conscious and unconscious beauty is feminine. And the pharaohs and other kings and other men from around the globe and throughout history, when they try to make themselves beautiful, more divine, you always end up seeing them with feminine features and curvy forms. A lot of the ancient Siberian shamans to this day, when they're going out to perform their ceremonies and magic, they dress like women. Same thing happens in Africa and even in Native America. Some of the outfits that I wear when my hair is long and I've got my, flowing robes and feathers and everything, it's very feminine in appearance. It doesn't change who I am. I can call myself an altered female, and I'll still go out there this afternoon, and I'll run 3 miles in 110, and all the men have to do who think they're just men and not altered females, you know what? All you got to do is just keep up with me. I'm an altered female. Just keep up. That's all you got to do. So altered female is not a bad thing. I am just saying that men and women are exactly the same with just the tiniest little difference in physical structure. And beauty is feminine. That's why these statues look like that. And a lot of the divine beings, the gods, were actually goddesses. Thank you. JP, sir, you had a question? I'm sorry. I want to make sure I give you enough time because I appreciate what you are doing for Rebecca, for me, and I hope to join you again here shortly.
Excellent, excellent. Well, the first thing is this is from my girlfriend. Her name is Nikki, otherwise known as Wolf Baby, in the chat room. So she'll be listening, hopefully, tomorrow night and or tonight. Now, you're listening now, Nikki. There you go. I would love to hear more about woman and astrology. How can we enhance our connection to the energies that nurture us? And do you have any tips on how to bring these energies and make them more accessible? This is in regard to the astrological garden that she's just building. And she's making a series of zones that represent the different parts of the astrology. So with regard to that, with regard to nature spirits and anything you wish to pass on about that kind of, this is how can she build something? She's a brilliant gardener. She can build whatever she wants.
It's an excellent question, and on my Lady of Fire site, I actually have a very brief breakdown on the astrological symbols. Earlier, I was talking about the eye, and it's the shape of the eye. Okay, it's this pointed oval. If you take the eye and you remove the pupil, you remove the eyebrows and everything like that, you just take that very simple, almost football shape, okay? That is a very primitive representation of, again, the woman's cut of her sexual organs. If on one end you extend the 2 lines out, you have a fish. What would be considered the pupil in the eye, if you move it towards the other end, you have the eye of the fish. Now, the fish was originally a symbol of the divine daughter. And yet, in later, thousands of years later, a male god religion, the fish is a symbol of a divine offspring of a male god. I will argue again and present in book 2, I think it's book 3, more evidence that a figure known as Jesus was promoting the divine feminine, and the fish was a symbol of the divine woman. Now, why do I bring up the fish? Pisces. Pisces comes from Pesca, P-E-S-C-A, which means or has been interpreted as fish. Yet, if you look up the Vesica symbol, V-E-S-I-C-A, linguistically, these 2 words, Vesica and Pesca, or Pesk, they're cognates. In other words, they're essentially forms of the same concept. And the Vesica is another symbol of the eye or the cut of a woman. If you look on my website on the Lady of Fire, you will see the Taurus symbol, the Pisces. I have begun on the website to present astrological symbols and show how they are in fact based on female symbols. Ultimately, the study of the stars of the Udugan women, what they are saying is that in the stars, there are pockets of energy. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who will deny astrology. It's not scientific. It's you get more energy from a light bulb in the operating room than you do from the stars, and I understand that. And to an extent, it makes sense. However, the Udugan women, in their shamanistic ways, basically say that if you were to look or focus on one of the constellations or a grouping of stars, that there is energy there that you can draw from. In other words, they say not that it is imposed on you at birth as much as at birth, and from that moment on, you have the opportunity to draw from the 96% that is in that constellation or that star. There are some excellent books out there about one, for example, the Cygnus constellation. When it sends out thousands of years ago, it sent out a burst of energy that appears to have struck the Earth at about the same time man was making these astonishing accomplishments. Solar energy, star energy, is bombarding this planet all the time. Generally, the astrology that is out there that I have seen has been derived from the efforts of men of power who have taken a woman's symbol and said, no, it means this, and therefore you have to behave in this way. Throughout time, men of power have said, women have to act like this, men have to act like that. The current astrology structures that I see still seem to try to produce this. As a Leo, you have to do this. As a Pisces, you have to do that. But the original concept was, from the constellation Leo, from the constellation Pisces and the others, there are energies that are being directed, that come naturally, scientific energy waves that come at us. And if we focus on that 96 energy, we can use it. We can use it to increase our own fire. So there is validity in astrology, but rather than argue it's imposed on you at birth or throughout life, the Udugan says you can draw from it at any point in your life. Maybe you were born during the constellation of Pisces, but you can draw from Taurus, you can draw from Virgo and the like. So, unfortunately, it's far too brief an explanation, but there is validity. And for what it's worth, Miss Nikki, in my home, my garden in the backyard, phenomenal. You cannot spend enough time. I have created some stone circles out there that allow me to go out and feel the what's going on in the stars. I go out all the time. In fact, I will, Rebecca and JP, I will toss out very quickly that in July, the end of July, I will have my an honoring at some ruins up in northern Arizona and in Bell Rock, and I'm going to announce on the website, but I'll give you first shot. I will open the honoring journey. It's going to be a weekend of, I believe, 27, 28 July. I don't recall. And I'm going to open the doors to the two of you. You can be my guests. We'll go do an honoring. I'll show you what I do. We'll go to Bell Rock and we'll go to some ruins and do the honorings. But it's at that point that hopefully I can, if I do it right, if I do it well, that energy will appear, and we often get phenomena. We get balls of light, we get whirlwinds, we get eagles, we get different things happening. And that is my form of, Nikki, astrology, drawing from the stars. So I encourage you, do your garden, and even if the symbols have been masculinized, the symbols are actually feminine. And if you use those, you're going to enjoy yourself, and it's going to increase your fire. So please do so. If you can do that in your garden, absolutely encourage.
I tell you, there is nothing Nikki likes doing better than moving rocks around. I'm not kidding. She loves rocks. She's